Well, we continue not to be able to say the C word, so instead we're going to call it the T virus, which I think is quite fun for a lot of fans of Resident Evil. And we are seeing at the moment, especially here in the UK, and we're especially seeing in America, two very, very incompetent people who need to take leadership and decisive action to be able to tackle this T virus. um, yeah, it's a complete. It makes them look complete jokes and idiots and imbeciles, and I'm glad that it does, because certainly Boris Johnson's electability is called into question, and I have said there is a very interesting idea that you could put money on Boris Johnson not surviving until the next election. Because if this a whole fiasco does get worse, and it is looking like it is going to get worse, he's just, as of this Friday, finally closed the pubs, restaurants, and all these other things that many other European countries had already closed. All the other European countries got a massive jump on Boris doing this, this, and this. And has it slowed down their infection rates? Yes. While in the UK, it's only gone up. There are 8 cases in my town at the moment. There were none just a couple of days ago. So this comes from The Atlantic. And it basically is an opinion piece by a guy called Peter Wiener. And it is basically the Trump presidency is over. It has taken a good deal longer than it should have, but Americans have now seen the con man behind the curtain. When in January of 2016, I wrote that despite being a lifelong Republican who worked in 3 previous GOP administrations, I would never vote for Donald Trump, even though his administration would align much more with my political views than a Hillary Clinton presidency would, a lot of my Republican friends were befuddled. How could I not vote for a person who checked far more of my policy boxes than his opponent? What I explained then, and what I have said many times since then, is that Trump is fundamentally unfit intellectually, morally, temperamentally, and psychologically for office. For me, that is the paramount consideration in electing a president, in part because at some point it's reasonable to expect that the president will face an unexpected crisis. And at that point, the president's judgment and demeanour, his character and his leadership ability will really matter. Mr. Trump has no desire to acquaint himself with most issues, let alone master them, is how I put it for 4 years ago. No major presidential candidate has ever been quite as distasteful for knowledge, as indifferent to facts, as untroubled by his blightedness. And I added this. Mr. Trump's virulent combination of ignorance, emotional instability, demagoguery, sophism, and vindictiveness would do much more than result in a failed presidency. It could very well lead to a national catastrophe. The prospect of Donald Trump as commander-in-chief should send a chill down every spine of every American. Written back in 2016. It took until the second half of Trump's first term, but the crisis has arrived in the form of the T-virus pandemic, and it's hard to name a president who has been overwhelmed by a crisis. The T-virus has overwhelmed Donald Trump. To be sure, the president isn't responsible for either the T-virus or the disease it causes, and he couldn't help have stopped it from hitting our shores, even if it had done everything right. Nor is it the case that the president hasn't done anything right. In fact, his decision to implement a travel ban on China was prudent, and any narrative that attempts to pin all the blame on Trump for the T-virus is simply unfair. The temptation among the president's critics to use the pandemic to get back at Trump for everything bad he's done should be resisted. The Schadenfreude is never a good look. That said, the president and his administration are responsible for grave and costly errors, most especially the epic manufacturing of failures in diagnostic testing, the decision to test too few people, and to delay the expanding of testing to labs outside the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention. The problems in the supply chain, the mistakes have left us badly behind the curve, and in a few crucial weeks, they will create a false sense of security. What we know now is that the T virus silently spread for several weeks without us being aware of it while we were doing nothing to stop it. The containment and mitigation efforts could have significantly slowed its spread at an early and critical point, but we frittered away that opportunity. They've simply lost time that they can't make up. You can't get back 6 weeks of blindness. Jeremy Kondiak, who helped oversee the international response to Ebola during the Obama administration and is the senior political fellow for the CDC, told the Washington Post, "To the extent that there's someone to blame here, the blame is on the poor, chaotic management from the White House and the failure to acknowledge the bigger picture." Because Trump, if you haven't seen what's going on, Trump fed fuel to this fire that this whole T virus was made up, that it was fake, that it was made up by the Democrats. It's absolutely insane. Earlier this week, Anthony Fauci, the widely respected director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, whose reputation for honesty and integrity have only been enhanced during this crisis, admitted in the congressional testimony that the United States is still not providing adequate testing for the T virus. It's failing. Let's admit it, he added. The idea of anybody getting tested easily, the way people in other countries are doing it, was not set up for that. I think we should be, but we're not. We know that the World Health Organization had working tests and the United States refused, and researchers at a project in Seattle tried to conduct early tests for the T virus, but were prevented from doing so by federal officials. Doctors at the research project eventually decided to platform T-virus tests without federal approval. But that is not all. The president reportedly ignored early warnings of the severity of the virus and grew angry at the CDC official who in February warned that an outbreak was inevitable. The Trump administration dismantled the National Security Council's Global Health Office, whose purpose was to address global pandemics, and we're now paying the price for that. We worked very well with that office, Fauci told Congress. It would be nice if the office was still there. We may face a shortage of ventilators and medical supplies, and hospitals may soon well be overwhelmed. Certainly if the number of T-virus cases increases at the rates of anything like that in countries such as Italy. This would not only cause needless related deaths, but also deaths from the suffering of other ailments who have recently who won't have readily access to hospital and care. Some of these mistakes are less serious and more understandable than others. One has to take into the account that the government, when people are forced to make important decisions based on incomplete information, are in a compressed period of time, things go wrong. Yet, in some respects, the avalanche of false information from the president has been the most alarming of all. It has been one rock slide after another, the likes of which we have never seen. Day after day, he brazenly denied reality in an effort to blunt the economic and political harm he faced. But Trump is in the process of discovering that he can't spin or tweet his way out of a pandemic. There is no one that can do there's no one who can do the T-virus away what Attorney General William Barr did with the Mueller report, lie about it and get away with it. The president's misinformation and mendacity about the T-virus are head-slapping. He claimed that it was contained in America when it was hardly actually spreading. He claimed that we had, quote, shut it down when we had not. He claimed that testing was available when it wasn't, and he claimed that the T-virus will one day disappear like a miracle. It won't. He claimed that a vaccine would be ready in months. Fauci said it will not be available for a year or more. Trump has falsely blamed Obama administration for impeding the testing. He stated that the virus first hit the United States later than it actually did. He said that it hit it 3 weeks prior to the point at which he spoke. The actual figure was twice that. The president claimed that the number of cases in Italy was getting much better when he was actually getting much worse. And one of the most stunning statements an American president has ever made, Trump admitted that his preference was to keep a cruise ship off the California coast rather than allowing it to dock, because he wanted to keep a number of reported cases artificially low. I like the numbers, Trump said. I would rather have the numbers they say they were at. But if they want to take them off, they'll take them off. But if that happens, you all of a sudden get 240 cases, so it's obviously going to be a much more higher number, and probably 11 deaths will be a higher number too. That's so difficult trying to read Trump's statements. They're so difficult. And it goes on and on. To make matters worse, the president delivered an Oval Office address that was meant to reassure the nation and markets, but instead shook both. The president's delivery was awkward and stilted. Worse, at several points, the president, who decided to ad-lib the teleprompter speech, mistranslated his administration's own policies, which the administration then had to correct. Stock figures plunged even as the president was still delivering his speech. In his address, the president called for Americans to unify together as one nation and one family. Despite having referenced Washington Grover J. Ainsley as a snake days before the speech and attacking Democrats the morning after it. As the Washington Post, Dan Blatz put it, almost everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong with the speech, and the speech did go wrong. Taken together, this is a massive failure in leadership that stems from a massive defect in character. Trump is such a habitual liar that he is incapable of being honest, even when being honest would serve his interest. He is so impulsive, short-sighted, and undisciplined that he is unable to plan or even think beyond the moment. He is such a decisive and polarizing figure that long ago he lost the ability to unite the nation under any circumstances for any cause, and he is so narcissistic and unreflective that he is completely incapable from learning from his mistakes. The president's disorderly personality makes him ill-equipped to deal with a crisis as any president has ever been, with few exceptions. What Trump has said is not just useless, it's downright injurious. The nation is recognizing this, treating him as a bystander, as a school superintendents, sports commissioners, college presidents, governors, and business owners across the country take it upon themselves to shut down much of American life without clear guidance from the president. In the words of Pete Baker and Maggie Herman of the New York Times, Donald Trump is shrinking before our eyes. The T virus is quite literally to be the Trump's presidency's infection point, where everything changed, when the bluster and ignorance and shallowness of America's 45th president became undeniable and empirical reality, as indisputable as the laws of science or mathematical equation. It's taken a good deal longer than it should have, but Americans have now seen the con man behind the curtain, the president enraged for having been unmasked. He will become more desperate, more embittered, and more unhinged. He knows nothing will be the same. His administration may stagger on, but it will only be a hollow shell. The Trump presidency is over. So, will it be over? We probably won't know till the elections, which will be next year, I think it is. Obviously, is it this November? I can't remember now. But that's coming up soon. Actually, no, it's this year, isn't it? Yeah, it's this year, this November. But we'll have to see what happens. And as I've said multiple times, there is a lot of really strong evidence to suggest that Trump won't leave the White House peacefully if he loses, which it could spark a lot more of dangerous and deadly stuff. But yeah, we've got another article we're going to go over to, I think soon this week as well, over what really has gone wrong in America, and that's from the New York Times. So we'll see you then, and hopefully, stay safe.